Plugin of the week is the Universal Audio AKG BX20. The AKG BX20 is actually an emulation of a hardware unit that was created in 1970. The AKG Corporation goes back to the mid-40s, so they have been making microphones and doing all kinds of other things. And they set about going through the process of creating a mechanical reverb that would work alongside plates. And one of the problems with spring reverbs, because they have been around for a while, is that they have generally a sort of lo-fi kind of boingy kind of quality. And what AKG went about doing is they wanted to create something that had more texture and much more richness to it, and didn't have a lot of the problems associated with spring reverbs, which people mostly know from guitar amps and things like that. So they came out with a line of them. This is the BX20 here, and so this is an actual piece of wood cabinet. And I'm going to show you another picture here where it's actually suspended. There was also a BX10, which is a smaller version of it. Now, you'll notice this front interface here. Take note of that, because that's what the front interface is going to look like of the actual unit. They actually took some of the equalization and parts or elements of the BX10 and put them into the BX20 emulation. And then there's a BX5, which is more of a rack-mounted version. So there were a couple variations of this. And they were big in studios throughout the 70s. This is an actual picture of the inside of the cabinet here. So you could see that everything is shock spring mounted, and then they actually have two springs inside of this suspended cabinet here. So they would have like an A side, or channel 1 and a channel 2, and this is the remote control unit that would be up on the desk. Now, normally with plate reverbs and mechanical reverbs, one of the problems, or one of the issues, is they have to be kind of isolated from major sound sources. Otherwise, what will happen is the vibration will actually bleed in to the actual reverb unit itself. So, somebody screaming into this cabinet would come through in the control room as reverb, and you would hear that. Now, when you look at the actual original literature, they claim that this is not really was not really the case, but I'm pretty convinced that it was. And I've worked with them in studio, but I've never had that experience. I know it definitely works with EMT plates. Now, the reverb time here is controlled here on the R20 decay time. So you would actually have separate reverb time control for the A capsule and the B capsule. They don't call it the capsule. I can't remember exactly, the cylinder. And so the two of those would kind of be set up here, and then you could operate it accordingly. This is what the plug-in unit looks like here. And essentially, if you remember just what I was showing you there with the BX10, it has a lot of these same controls. You can operate it as a mono in or stereo in. So this is actually instantiated as stereo, but if you make it mono, then what happens is it sums the left and right and feeds it to both the left and the right side. And this was a common thing where you might use a mono send or something into it, and this would just kind of, mono things up. And I'll explain kind of the way that this works as we kind of go through it. There's a stereo signal here. Now, this is something that's kind of unique. It's a direct switch. So the unit has the ability to kind of feed. This is not, when I say direct, this is not direct like your unprocessed signal. This is set up on a send return configuration. So this is actually going through the electronics and part of the whole mechanism and fed back to the output. And so you have the ability to kind of put that signal in or leave it out, and it will add like a density or character. And maybe we'll kind of do a little A/B on that. Now, there actually are two of the settings here. There's an A setting, a B setting, and these are the two main units, or the main springs. And then you could do it in an A/B configuration, which puts cylinder 1 on one side and cylinder 2 on the other side. Now, you'll notice that there's a flashing LED when I make the changes here. And this is because the way that the plugin is actually set up is that it's like loading up sort of a convolution, and what they call like a hybrid convolution design, where it's not just a convolution or a single convolution, but it's a combination of them. And they use their own proprietary thing, and they have their own language for it, which is not really important for this. But here, what we could do is each one of these has a distinct characteristic. So if we run it in stereo, it'll actually give us a stereo output feed of just the A channel or just the B channel. And so this is something that's unique, because this would be sort of a mono output. And so they're giving you some sort of version of the stereo by the way that they kind of work with the impulse responses or the convolution. And so we have an A, B, and so they each have a little bit of a slightly different character, and you can kind of work with it. So when you do it stereo like this and this, you actually have a completely split reverb, which is really cool. And then if you unlink them, then you have the ability to control the left and right side reverb times independently, and the character and equalization. Well, actually, the character and equalization is the same. You could also adjust the volume, and you could adjust the pan position of them on the output. So you have them when they're linked, then you have the ability to control this. Now, the thing you need to be cautious of if you're into like automating reverb parameters is that there is a latency when you make an adjustment for the setting to actually be loaded and enacted. So that's kind of an important thing to do. Now, there's a low-cut filter. The low-cut filter works at 80 hertz, and it's second order filter, 12 dB per octave. So that will cut off low frequencies. There's also a bass roll-off, which uses a Baxendal shelf or filter, which has like a very broad slope, and that's centered around 150 hertz. And then the high end is centered up around 5 kilohertz, again with a very broad slope. So it's using that Baxendal curve. So the Baxendal curve, if you're not familiar with it, was the first active equalization, sort of shelving equalization. And what it would do is it was very musical. It became like what amounted to the bass treble control. And this is ended up in countless stereos and home systems and stuff like that. So that became like a big thing on it. You also have a pre-delay. If you keep the wet solo button in, then what that does is it makes this inactive. Otherwise, if you put it on the insert of a track, then you would have the ability to go from 0, completely dry, to 100% wet. So again, the dry signal is different from the direct signal. Okay, and I'll try to kind of demonstrate a little bit of that so you can kind of hear it. And then, of course, you have the panning and the power switch. So the power switch, all that does is it actually takes it off of, if you're familiar with the UAD processing, you have separate hardware with actual separate processor chips that do all the processing in the UAD world. So if you want to take a plugin with the proper setup in the settings, you can make it so that this is no longer taking up CPU cycles. So this unit is actually, when you looked at that picture, it's pretty big. It was like 110 pounds. Not, a pretty hefty unit, and they called it portable. Like this was something that you could just kind of drag around, I guess, I don't know, in a gig bag or something. I don't know. And they were, fairly big, like a good, if you're thinking about it, like maybe 4.5 feet tall, which would be like maybe a meter and a half tall, something like that, a little less than that, maybe a meter and a third, somewhere along those lines. But a very, very cool unit. This is like an amazingly rich reverb. Like when I looked at the original specs for this, it actually shows a frequency response of 20 hertz up to 8 kilohertz, plus minus 5 dB. So that's like a pretty broad range. It's like a very warm, rich, dense sounding reverb. So one of the things I kind of want to just do a couple of demonstrations here, just to kind of show some individual sounds here, and then we'll kind of tweak along with some of the settings here. So one of the things I'll just start off with, maybe just to show here, and let's see if this is a good demonstration material, is just a piano. And let's see if I could just kind of solo this up, bring that up, and then unmute it here. So you get a sense of the reverb. So just so you can hear without it, just to get a sense of the original sound. So it has a real richness. Now watch what happens as I kind of bring up the reverb time here, because it kind of takes on like a really completely different character. Okay, I was wondering why the gain was so high there. Okay, so I didn't intentionally do that. So anyway, you could hear like there's a lot of richness and depth to it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of take this and kind of bring this down and kind of pull this back a little bit, and then kind of maybe... And then I'm also going to kind of mix in a couple of other instruments and maybe kind of double up some other instantiations so you can kind of get a sense of what this is all about. Now, this is the same kind of thing here. So I'll bring up the return. And maybe I'll take off some of the other effects here so we could... So now we also have a pre-delay. Now what's interesting is that when you read the specifications for the original Reverb, it actually says that there is automatically just a mechanical 20 to 50 millisecond pre-delay. And this is not mentioned anywhere in the documentation on the UAD world. So I'm not sure if they just dealt with this or just said, okay, let's just kind of go with this, make it 0, because you can make it anything that you want and kind of work with it from there. But this helps to add some depth. And it's so rich and just and dense. You know, it's really, really beautiful. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to just kind of take this here, and then I'm actually going to duplicate it, and then we'll kind of set up some other settings and maybe do something a little bit along the lines here for a guitar setup. So what I'll do here is I'll kind of move this over to here. I have some guitars. I'll call up the other reverb setting here, and then I'll change my insert feed here to 55, 56. And now here I'm going to keep it, now like with that I kept it stereo in, stereo out. And I'll kind of leave this, but this is, I just wanted to show you something here which is kind of cool, because if I have certain parts here, like I have a couple of R&B guitars here, and what I'll do is I'll just kind of assign this to a couple of tracks, and then we'll see here. So I changed that to 55, 56. All right, and all right, so we'll take that up and then cue up to a good place where those guitars are actually playing. It's a little helpful. And let's see. Okay, so here I'm gonna take and kind of open this up, because obviously that's a lot, but I want you to kind of hear like some of the depth. Right, really kind of just lovely. I don't even really want to change the sound that much, although I do want to kind of demonstrate some other things. Here I can actually kind of play with a little bit of the EQ, like if I wanted to kind of warm this up a little bit, even more so, then I could take this down, take the bass cut out, boost some of the low end in. Now, with the documentation, it was hard to find. I'm not exactly clear where this equalization occurs in the circuit, if it occurs going into the spring or whether it occurs at the output of the spring. So that I'm not entirely clear about, and I can't seem to find the documentation exact on that. I'll make an update and post it just to kind of let you know about that. But for the timing of this, I wanted to get this out. So anyway, let's kind of hear this. My feeling is that it's feeding into the spring, because the different amounts of equalization kind of feeding in would make the spring react differently, and perhaps give you a little bit more reverb time at a particular frequency, or overexcite it and change the tonal character as opposed to just equalizing the output. But I can't verify that. So really, really, I just love this. So let's kind of check this out in the track here, and I'll kind of mute down the vocals here so we can kind of see what that's like and kind of A/B it a little bit in and out, just get a sense for what that's about. So these are my two here. And then, as you start kind of taking this on, I'm going to do this also on a string, some strings. And so I'm just going to kind of duplicate this again here and see how many instantiations it takes to blow up. It's actually, in looking at this, for those of you familiar with the UAD system, it was not a CPU intensive one. So, it looks like I created two of them. All right, so that's fine. And what I'll do here is I'll just kind of pick one. Oh, because they were both selected. That makes sense. All right, 57, 58, and then maybe I'll just create another one because who the heck knows what it'll do. And I'll just kind of call this and kind of put some strings in through this. So these are just some more or less kind of generic or synth strings. So nothing like on the richness scale in terms of being something really unique. So I'll feed this to. All right, so let me queue up here like a nice place here for where the strings come in. We also have a B3 there. Yeah, so let's kind of go to this like a nice little run right here. And this is something where I can kind of, kind of rich this out and kind of go with a higher thing, maybe a little bit more pre-delay. You can really, it's really, really, really cool. You can get this, amazing sense of just the depth and warmth that's kind of added in there. So I love it. One quick last one here, just to give you a little bit of a thing. And I just want to put this on some drums here. And I'm not going to go crazy here. Probably just start with a snare verb or something like that and see what we can make happen with this here. So probably we'll start with something. Nope. Oh no. All right, so hold on, I'm going to get that back and make sure I get onto the right one. That's more or less where that one was. So this might be a little bit much for it here. I'm going to and maybe what I'll do is I'll go through the A and B. So you really hear the distinct difference between the two. I'm going to take that direct out. And see if I can push some body into it. All right, so let's see what this sounds like in the track. go back to an earlier part in the song where we can actually hear it. Of course, a little happy here with the reverb amounts, so I'll kind of back it up. I think that one with those guitars sort of got a little bit out of hand, or might have changed it by accident. So I'll do a quick A/B with them all in or out. So I think you get a sense of like the richness and the depth that you can kind of get with this, and that's really what makes the BX20 kind of a unique reverb, sort of winging together the mix and putting together the examples and kind of doing it the way I always do it, which is to just make it up as I go along, pull up the plugin and see what it sounds good on, and experiment. So that's the result, but a very, very cool one. There's actually a lot of character and depth as you start to really dig into some of the parameters, especially when you go through the different settings here with the A and the B, and also adjusting the reverb time, the different tonal character adjustments. A very, very cool one. It's got a, if you're looking for like a rich, warm, really analog sound that's very, very 60s, then this is definitely, or 70s really, then this is kind of a good one to have in the collection. So a new one and a really good one. Universal Audio's AKG BX20 Spring Reverb.